Hello, Dustin. So glad to have you with us today. For those who are joining, my name is Jordan. If we haven't had the chance to meet, and I'm the digital discipleship pastor at Faith Chapel, sitting down with Dustin Lehman. But before I talk too much about you and parenting and all the things that I don't know very much about, would you share with us a little bit about who you are and what you get to do?
Yeah, my name is Dustin Lehman, and I'm a marriage and family therapist and a licensed clinical professional counselor. I got a couple kiddos myself, and sometimes I wonder if I really know what I'm doing too. So.
Well, it's good to know that maybe the pros are struggling too. I mean, it sounds horrible to say that. Hey, good, I'm glad you're struggling, but good to know that we're all in this together. So, I mean, all jokes aside, parenting is tough, and so the whole reason we're sitting down is to try and figure out, how do we do this better? How do we raise our kids to be good people? How do we, as Christians, as myself, a Christian yourself, how do we raise them up to follow Jesus and love others well? But it's tough. I mean, like there are good days, there's bad days. So would love to hear from you. What are some of the foundational things to kick off this entire thing? What are some foundational things that we need to know?
Well, you know, I'm really a firm believer that, like, we learn basically everything we need to know through our experiences of love and trustworthiness. Like, every kid's born into the world with two questions, right? Who am I and is it safe? And so in terms of the foundational understanding, like, if we carry that as parents, those two questions that we're constantly answering for our kids, who am I? They're asking, who am I? Is it safe? If I keep those questions active, my answers to them are going to be super helpful. So foundationally speaking, I mean, you think about what is it that I'm doing is going to represent who I am. So doing is the gateway to being. If I'm yelling at my kids, guess what that tells them? I am not safe for them, right? So one of the things that's really, really important is to posture and position yourself for love and trustworthiness. You know, anytime my kiddos push the button, that gets me just to the place where I'm like, I don't know if I know what I'm doing. The first thing I do in that moment is I go and I hug them. I just hug them. I squeeze the back of their arms. I feel their hair on my face. And that just gets me out of this place where I'm going to put myself in a place where maybe I'm not doing something that's so loving or safe, or trustworthy. So posturing and positioning is really, really important. The other thing I love to say is it's really important to have clear and well-defined targets for them to express themselves. When kids are upset or having trouble or whatever, they're having a difficult time figuring out how to express what they're thinking or feeling. And so having those clear targets, one of my phrases I use all the time with them when they're not doing a very effective job in communicating what it is, I'll say, start over or try again. Try again.
Yeah.
I tell myself that too.
Yeah.
Hold on, I'm going to try again. And the idea, if I have a clear target of my expression, it makes it a lot easier to kind of navigate some of those difficult times. So another one, to have really consistent and patterns of communicating both the good, the corrective things, and also the bad things, right? So if you don't have a balance of give and take, safety, security, trustworthiness is kind of hard to find, honestly.
Can you unpack that just a little bit? What would it look like for somebody to have a consistent pattern of communicating the good, but also identifying the bad? Give us a picture of what that might look like. I think that I might understand what you're saying there, but can you give us some examples? Yeah,
so at the end of every day, the kids and I will say, I'll say, what is the best and the worst part of your day? I absolutely love this because you think about it's the natural rhythm of God's design, right? The sun rises and it sets. You breathe in and you breathe out. So the best and the worst part of the day gives us the kind of, not always really, really well defined, but it gives us at least some kind of focus. So, almost always when they have something, the best part of my day was, they'll say something. And then when they hit the worst, it makes space for us to connect on something that maybe we hadn't.
Yeah.
So that's one really simple one.
And you would say having that being a consistent rhythm, like where you're trying to do this on a regular basis. Okay.
Regularly.
Yeah.
And there's so many different ways of calling it. I've heard cheers and jeers, roses and thorns.
Yeah. I've heard highs and lows.
Highs and lows. Yeah. Peaks and valleys.
Yeah.
So any of those kind of things would be good. When it comes to the bad stuff, the corrective stuff, I think it's really important that you have a type of language that you allow. Like you can't. I always say to my kids, talk to me like I'm talking to you. In the midst of bad, when they're having a hard time, they're crying through their words. Hold on, talk to me like I'm talking to you, because for them to have this practice of regulating themselves. We're gonna get way more into that too along the way, but
Yep.
that's definitely an important deal.
Great.
You know, another really, I think, foundational bit is routine is like the culture of a healthy family.
Sure.
Routine, and it's not to say it needs to be boring, but there has to be consistency, predictability, reliability, and routines are something that kids look forward to, right? I mean, that's like a critical thing.
Yeah.
Another thought I had about a foundational thing would be the idea of paying attention, like paying, like when you pay attention, it's effectively like purchasing
Sure.
sweet, intimate time with your children. I mean, attention is like one of the easiest ways to connect with your kids.
Yeah.
Just literally, hey, Dad, look at this.
Yep.
Look what I did.
Yep.
Watch this.
Yep.
That's all it's such an easy transaction. You pay that and you have a sweet, intimate space.
Yep.
So that's a foundation. Without attention, you lose all sorts of space with them.
Which, I mean, we've even noticed over the last several weeks that in our parenting journey right now, both of our kids seem to, I've got 2 boys, they both seem to be sponges for attention. And it doesn't matter, you know, we're lamenting a little bit as parents is like, it's like, I can't give you enough attention is what it feels like. There's a little bit of frustration baked into that. Right. But this morning I was making my cup of coffee and the boys were sitting downstairs and just kind of having a chill moment. And I thought I could sit by myself, and this isn't quite the same. I could sit by myself and have my cup of coffee all by myself, or I could go just sit with them and be near them, since I've noticed that there's this connection. And I heard your voice in the background of connect before correct, which we'll get to later. But I thought, you know what? I'm going to start today, instead of with a bunch of correction, I'm just going to start today with a little bit of connection. And that paying attention, I just noticed it was like, it was food for their souls, for to use a cheesy deal. But yeah, paying attention's huge. It's absolutely huge.
Yeah. Definitely. The other thing is when, you know, another big piece, I'm guilty of this too, but I mean, the volume idea, like as parents, I mean, I don't know what the number is for you, but when you say something like, I don't want to have to tell you 15 times. I don't know why it's always 15.
See, for me, it's 3. How many times do I have to tell you? Yeah. I've told you 3.
3 times. 15 times. So the idea is that if you represent yourself in a way that doesn't show that you can control, regulate, be disciplined in your communication. I'm not perfect. I failed this. If you don't represent, well, how would they? Right. Yeah. So the idea is volume is really, really important. So when I get to that place where my buttons and I give them a hug or I'm finding it, I start to whisper. Whispering is something for me. It doesn't work for hey, and then they have to try to listen. It doesn't always work, but it just reduces the intensity for me.
Yeah. De-escalates a little bit.
Yeah, well, it does.
Yeah. How do you, just to zoom in real quick practically, how do you train yourself to think of that in the moment?
It's this weird thing. I feel it in my sternum. That's why I keep pointing at my sternum. Okay. When I hit that button in my chest, that's where I go, I got to, that's the volume for me. It's just volume control. It's just a button control. What did I just say?
Yeah.
What did you hear? Yeah. Okay. Or another big question I think is super powerful is, if you continue doing that, what do you think that's going to turn into? If you choose that, what is the outcome? Stuff like that. Oh, they're good questions.
Yeah. Yeah. And just for reference, how old are your kids?
They're 4 and 7.
So even at a young age, asking questions like that, where they're having to evaluate what are the consequences and where could this lead to? Yep. Okay, great. Yep. So one of the reasons that what sparked our conversation, what sparked this entire series, what came from some conversations around anxiety and depression. And in the midst of us beginning to figure out, hey, how do we come alongside parents and help equip them to raise their kids, one of the trigger or pressure points was anxiety and depression. And there was a study that came out in the midst of our conversations that said that Billings was one of the most anxious and depressed cities in the nation, which is not the list you want to be at the top of, right? And students are feeling that. Our kids are feeling that. They're not immune to any of these emotions, any of these things that play out in their lives. So when we started this, that's where I wanted to go. I was like, hey, can you help us understand how do we parent our kids through anxiety, through depression, through all of those things? And you instead wanted to zoom out a little bit. So can you help me understand why wouldn't we start with some of these felt needs is what I would call them, where it's like, hey, I'm feeling this right now. My kid has anxiety. What do I do? Why wouldn't we start there?
Yeah. Well, anxiety, depression, and I'll throw in anger. They're some of the most obvious, issues that we can see. They're obvious because they're not the primary issue. They're all secondary. If you think about when you go to like a doctor, he doesn't treat inflammation necessarily. He treats the core issue, right? That's really the focus.
Sure.
Inflammation gets in the way,
Yep.
and subsequently has to have some attention, but it's not the core issue. So that's why I was like, we can go to anxiety, we could go to depression, but there's something that feeds those. So it's part of the process of restoration, and I think we have to start at the beginning, which is understanding who we are, and when violated results in anxiety or depression or anger.
Okay, so say that again
Yeah.
and emphasize it, because I think
Yeah.
it'd be really easy to gloss over that. That was a really great phrase to understand and know.
Yeah. So anger, depression, anxiety are not our primary thing.
Right.
They are the byproduct of a violation of who we are. So we have to understand who we are first in order to know that when that's violated, it produces pain. If I kick you in the knee, man, your ear doesn't hurt. And you know exactly what it is, right? So the idea is as it would be for our identity. If I have pain and I don't know where it's located, that's a problem.
Yep.
So anxiety, depression, anger, which is the swell, is not necessarily tethered to something that we need to know. And you'll find that unless you get to the place of understanding who you are and what was violated, you're just going to continue to cycle through it. You'll see this with kids. You'll see this in yourself. The same perpetual issues that come up and go around again and come around again. Why are we still talking about this? It's all the same thing over and over again. It's because you're missing the identity that's been violated rather than the swelling of anxiety, depression, and anger.
That's incredibly helpful, and I imagine it's some hard work to get through.
Hard work,
yeah,
man.
yeah. So you've talked about this concept, and we might even go into some of that, who we are and that violation in this, but because I want to set up this foundational truth, and at the beginning of this, you might have seen the slide that says Domino Parenting. And that's not necessarily something people would have heard before. And in our conversations, we've talked about how do we set up all of these conversations around something. And you've used this phrase, domino parenting. And I think I understand what it means, that we're beginning with something that triggers a lot of other repercussions in a positive way. Those all sounded negative. But unpack this phrase. What is domino parenting? What does this have to do with who we are, our identity? Unpack this phrase.
Yeah, I really like to be able to have something that's tangible to understand. And so as I was thinking about this, how can we equip parents, like the understanding of a domino, right? It's all this potential energy. That's exactly a really easy summation of what a child is, or kids are. They're all this potential energy. And so what do? We have a unique position to start the process to turn potential into kinetic. Like my little guy, Camden, who's 4, he just started playing the drums, and he's not amazing, but there's a lot of potential, right? Yeah. And so sure enough, I'm going to see what I can do to support that, to turn that into something if that's something he's good at. He also, he loves baseball, and so we, again, I'm going to set him up with all the things I can get in front of him so he can be successful with it. Yeah. If it turns into nothing, then it turns into nothing. If the dominoes end, then they end. But whatever comes up or whatever potential there is, I'm going to chase it until it's done. Because that's essentially what a unique special spot that I get to be with them. Yeah. Both of my kids.
Yep. So how does that tie into the rest of it? Where do we go with that?
So we get out of sequence. I'm sure you've done this where you set up all these dominoes and then it doesn't continue.
Right.
And so what do? We got to set it up in a way that's sequential. So whether or not we are out of order with respect to how we see ourselves, and then what makes sense to express ourselves. How if we're out of order, of like what happens when I do kick you in the knee, like what's the process of restoring that? Yeah. Is that out of order? Yep. Is the thing? Do I just get stuck in swelling because? As I was saying earlier, if I stay stuck in swelling, healing doesn't continue physically or emotionally. Yeah. So that's part of the idea is like, how do I keep the potential into kinetic? How do I keep it moving?
Yep. Yeah. And I love that idea. That's a light bulb moment for me. But this idea of being out of order or out of sequence, and so. In all of this, even why we would start here with this foundation, and I kind of want to unpack this a little bit more, would be this like identity violation element would be, and even as we look to I'm setting myself up even for how we wrap up our conversation, but but there's a sequence to all of this. I love that phrase, and there's almost an order. And I think sometimes, for me, I tend to be afraid of. I'm a very formulaic person. I love formulas. I'm like, tell me how to do it, and then let's make sure it's repeatable. You know, those type of things. Sure. But sometimes with parenting, it feels like there's no formula. You know, I mean, you've probably even heard people say like, well, every kid's different, and you know, I even remember with Harvey, our firstborn, when he was born, we read a book, and it was recommended so highly from some friends, and my memory of it, and I don't know if this is accurate, would be everything the book said that he should do and would happen when we did this, it was the opposite. And so I was like, well, he's just not by the book, you know? And so, but I love this idea that we can look at parts of our lives, parts of our parenting and our identity, and find things that are out of sequence and then realign them and bring them back into where when we knock that domino, we might see something happen. So can we go back just real quickly into how does our identity set us up for all those sequences and set us up for the rest of our conversation?
Yeah. Like it's a big deal to me in terms of an identity for my family, right? It's a big deal to me that my kids know that what we do as people, what Lehmans do, is that we love people, that we help people, and we just don't quit. It's such a big deal to me. Just Saturday, I'll tell you this, and I think hopefully this will answer what you're saying. Just Saturday, my little guy, so Camden, he loves baseball, like I said. He had, he's got, I don't know, 6 different baseball bats. And he had his wiffle ball bat, and he's outside on the trampoline, and he's got that big long yellow wiffle ball bat. And the rule is, if you hit anything other than a baseball, the bat gets thrown away. So it gets broken and thrown away. So we're outside, and Addie starts to get in the trampoline, and he just cracks her right in the fingers, just cracks her right in the hands. And Addie's crying, and I go over there. I'm like, give me the bat, dude. He goes, no, Dad, no. I'm like, you know the rule, buddy. Give me the bat. And I wasn't angry, and I wasn't swollen, thankfully. And I grabbed it, and I walked into the thing, and it's bent, and it's going in the garbage, right? And he's like, that hurt my feelings, we go in, and we talk about it. Okay, this is the idea. Now what do we get to hope for? What do we get to work towards, And he was fine. Well, the next day, Addie, I go in the garage. We're outside again. We go into the garage, and she's got the bat out of the garbage. And she's trying to fix it. Ugh. And I said, Mac, what are you doing? And she says, I'm trying to fix his bat. Oh, I walked right up to her and I said, Addie, you're being loving and helpful, and this does nothing for you. So I said, give me that thing. And I fix it, get the crease out of it. And I said, you get to give it to him. And I want you to tell him he gets it back because you were choosing to be loving and helpful. Now, the idea of, I've set this up months and months ago, right? Years ago, where the idea that loving and helpful and don't quit. Yeah. And it's come around. Yeah. The dominoes haven't stopped. I didn't have to orchestrate that for her. She chose to carry it forward. And I think that's the same for us as parents, that we have to have that in place because we are going to replicate that for our kiddos. Yep. Does that answer?
Yeah, I mean, that's super helpful because I think what I would hope people can walk away with as a result of the series, and so this will be a nice transition, would be what I'm hoping that people can walk away with is that, what I'm hoping I walk away with is some practical tools to help to enter those moments, because I think, there's a few things you've told me that I've tried and they just didn't work, and it has nothing to do with the wisdom of the advice, but I think we want fast results and we want instant results, and we want to go like, hey, this should work every single time, and if it doesn't, then I guess it just doesn't work, right? And so I love the idea that we can begin to do things like that, where there's things that might be in motion and we get to see fruit later. That's a biblical principle, right? And so I love giving people thoughts like that. So can you give us in a series summary? Where are we going? Yeah. What are some of the things that we're going to unpack? What are some of the things that we can look forward to in these next few episodes?
Really quick, yeah. So it's going to be we're going to understand what it looks like to have clarity with our identity, ours as well as our kids, and maybe more of a collective as a whole. We're going to look at the violations of that and the what happens in the midst of it, and then how to address that, the restoration of it too. Like, what is the sequence of restoration, which then propels us into peace and action. And then we're going to talk about too at some point. We're going to talk about what happens when the dominoes are disordered. Yeah. When do we need to ask for help? Yeah. And then kind of finally what it looks like to to disciple or replicate this when our kids launch? What does that look like?
Yeah.
And how do we let go and let them hopefully carry forward what we've worked so hard to?
Yeah. My final question to you would be, what do you hope that parents take away from this entire series?
Yeah, parenting is so tough. I mean, it is such a tough gig. And my hope in many ways is that parents find some freedom to exist with who they are in the midst of their parenting, that they find a new renewed sense of connection with their kids, fresh perspective, how to discover new forms of being intimacy, which is intimacy, right? That they can have that. And that they feel equipped to handle way more than they came into the series with. Yeah.
Love it. Awesome. Well, thanks for your time, Dustin. Looking forward to our continued conversations.